again and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me for Warm-Up Wednesday today. We're going to talk about a nice warm-up that we can do on the BOSU balance trainer. I just purchased a bunch of BOSU Pros recently at the Idea PT West conference in Seattle, and I went to a great session with Shannon Fable known as 101 Ways to BOSU, and what really caught my attention was the way she warmed up the class and how important I feel like it is to create a great warm-up, especially with such a unique piece of equipment that can be very intimidating to participants. So first we want to identify what the most important goals are in the warm-up. First of all, of course, we want to warm people up. We want to make their body temperature higher or increase their body temperature. While we're doing that though, we also want to be waking up the proprioception, identifying that this is an unstable piece of equipment and kind of getting a feel for it so we can help them establish control and stability and success in the class, as well as getting the most out of the exercises, because if they're so worried about falling during the class, they're not going to be able to take their heart rate or their body to the next level. Another thing we want to make sure we ensure, including in the warm-up, are our rehearsal movements. So we're thinking ahead to what we're going to see in class, or we're showing them what we're going to help them identify is going to happen later in class. And then we also want to make sure that we're helping them move in all planes of motion and in multiple directions, especially in the warm-up. And we also want to show the options that we're going to give them throughout the class so that they know what to expect when they feel like, oh no, I'm not quite comfortable with that exercise. We can show them what they can do instead, especially when it comes to jumping on and off the BOSU. So again, first of all, I want to introduce you to the BOSU trainer. The difference between the BOSU Pro and the retail BOSU, I'm going to go ahead and grab the retail one really quick, is the retail one, I don't know if you can see, but it has these little feet, rubber feet on the bottom of it, and those pop off every once in a while. So the BOSU Pro, which I feel like is a great investment for group fitness studios and managers, it actually has rubber all the way around the bottom of the BOSU so that it sticks really well to the floor. We don't have to worry about parts of that coming off and then worry about having to replace them later. So I'm really excited about our BOSU Pros. So let's go ahead and start with some options for our warm-up. I would recommend initially at the beginning of class encouraging them to try to just stand on the BOSU, and ideally to kind of give them an idea of where to place their feet. You want to tell them to put the bullseye or the middle logo of the BOSU in the middle of the arches of the feet, and that tends to give them a perfect kind of forward, back, side to side place. Also, while they're standing on this unstable surface, help them identify what their feet are doing. So when I stand on the BOSU and I'm totally relaxed, I start to notice that the sides of my feet bay out, and then I have to actually use my adductors and my hips to encourage my muscles to pull my feet into a great position. So I'm actually working on my ankles and working on my legs a little bit more as I try to make sure that my feet are flat in all four corners of the feet. So encourage the students to identify that when they stand on the BOSU, and then just maybe have them rock through their feet. It feels so good to get that ankle mobility and that work throughout class, and then that's when you can start to talk about, you know what, if at any time you feel like you're going to come off the BOSU, what's nice is it's only a few inches off the floor. Just step off and then bring yourself right back on once you're ready to join us again. So giving them those options in the warm-up is great. So walking the feet forward and back, or rocking them forward and back, and then maybe take them to different parts of the BOSU. So you're like walking around, walking over here, walking to the back, noticing, maybe start to step a little bit, what the BOSU feels like in different places, because what's going to happen in class when they're moving quickly, they may end up in that spot, and it's not scary. So let them kind of identify what that feels like initially, and then just kind of take them into a march on that BOSU so they can feel that instability on their hips and their body, and then when you're ready, have them find a nice hip-width distance apart place, identify where those feet are again, and just have them start to move into a nice squat. From there, making sure you're cueing core, make sure you're cueing that chest upright. You want to read what's on their shirt. You're starting to give them some good cues, but we're rehearsing what's going to come in the class. Then to take it a step further, you can say take one foot to the center and then take the other foot off for a squat, an offset squat. This is when we can start to bring in some balance components on one leg. So this is when I like to introduce the body bar. So you can ask them to go into their squat, show them what's coming, and then explain that if that's too much, or if they're a little nervous their first time on the BOSU, they can actually use a body bar for that third point of contact to make them feel a little bit more comfortable. And then once they start to feel more comfortable, maybe they take it to that squat to balance. But showing them that option, rehearsing that movement, moving side to side, moving laterally, then taking it to an actual 1 foot balance. So if they were deciding they wanted to use that bar, taking them to a 1 foot balance, having them stay there for a little bit, maybe play with some reaching the leg back, reaching the leg to the side, letting that 1 foot all by itself start to identify with the BOSU. Then play with the other leg and start to talk about maybe one side being a little different. Everyone has a good side, everyone has a bad side. We've all done yoga before, and exactly knowing that that tends to happen. Then we can start to increase the heart rate a little bit. I would recommend this warm-up to be much longer than I'm giving you, especially when we start to get to jumping, because ideally, when do we want to start introducing jumping? Definitely not until after about 10 or so minutes into class. So don't start your warm-up with a straight like tuck jump. You're going to go or into running on the BOSU right away. So options to start running on the BOSU, you could start running off and on right away, or help them get back to the floor, take a second, let them run in place, and then bring them on the BOSU for a little bit, because what can be scary is going on and off the BOSU multiple times. Another thing we can take it to is understanding the hands on and off the BOSU, how that feels, because eventually you're going to maybe take them to, if you're doing all BOSU stuff on the BOSU the whole entire class, you're probably going to end up doing upper body at some point. So once you practice running on and off the BOSU, get your heart rate up a little bit, take them down into maybe on their hands, and if this bothers their wrists, encourage them to maybe take their hands to the forward edge or the apex of, or past the apex of the dome. And they're going to notice they can spread their fingers wider, and then it doesn't require them to have that much flexibility right away. So encourage them to maybe hold a plank here for a little while, and this is when you can start to introduce the options for when you go into a plank or a push-up, of flipping that BOSU over to the other side, maybe playing with some shoulder stability. For the warm-up, I wouldn't say necessarily you want to start doing push-ups right away in that warm-up, but a plank with some dynamic shoulder movement, maybe some rotation. Again, we want to make sure we're encouraging all planes of movement of the spine and the body as we're warming them up. Next, we can take it to some lunges. So I would recommend introducing the lunge forward first on the BOSU. So lunging onto the top of the BOSU, putting your foot right on top of the BOSU. You can play with lunging over the top of the BOSU. This can feel a little different than lunging to the front of the BOSU. Watching those knees, but I recommend just kind of aiming for that bullseye with that foot, then alternating the leg. I wouldn't recommend necessarily starting with just alternating the legs right away. Maybe start on one leg. Then, if you feel like in your class you're going to play with lunging off the BOSU backwards, show them the forward option, and then maybe show them the backward version, because it's much more difficult than the forward version. You're having to use that body to balance much more while you're reaching that leg back. And as we know, reverse lunges can be just more difficult or scarier for most clients. Then we can start to play with some jumping. So again, later in the beginning of the warm-up, making sure it's at the end, we can start to show them options for jumping. So what I loved about Shannon Fable's introduction to jumping on the BOSU is she explained how she tends to see people who teach classes on the BOSU go straight from, you have this option, or you have this option. But really there are so many other options in between. So someone can start with the basic version of this would be, of course, you don't even have to go on the BOSU. You could just jump on the floor if you're afraid of the BOSU. But if you wanted to test their limits on the BOSU, maybe they step up and down. This would be the base version. Maybe they take it a step further, they leap on, leap off. Maybe they even just leap on, step off. So giving them those layers without the bar, you can again take it to that leap on, step off. You could do leap on, leap off, but make sure they graduate to the jump on. So once they do the jump on, encourage them to stick the landing and then step off, because what can tend to happen is they just hop on and then they're off right away without gaining that really good landing and stability that the BOSU provides. So that is how I would recommend progressing the jump. Definitely make sure they can stick that landing really well and step off, before they start to play with jumping on, jumping off. Then after you've given them all of those layers, you are pretty much ready to start the class. I loved the 101 BOSU session, 101 Ways to BOSU session, and I'd highly recommend getting the DVD if you'd like. I believe it's on the BOSU website, and I really enjoyed that session with Shannon. But hopefully you have some good ideas and have a good understanding of how to warm your students up to get acquainted with the BOSU and be prepared for a great BOSU-based workout. Happy Wednesday!